Hello everyone, this is Professor Puny Army here, Chief Information Officer of Clan Oni, back with another part of the Kilo report. So this is the report on the mid-range kilos, and we're going to start with the Gur, as I believe it is pronounced, but don't quote me on that. I start with the Gur because it's technically actually a close-range kilo build with the option to fight at the medium range if you really need to. But contrary to what I was expecting when I tested this particular build, it actually performs a little better at the mid-range than I was personally expecting. There are a couple of reasons for this, and the first thing is the bomb that I'm going to drop on you. The 4 times flip hybrid actually is not 4 times zoom. It is actually 3.25 if you read the description and see how it changes the stats. So the 4 times flip hybrid is actually a blatant lie. That's the first thing. And if you look at the stats, yes, it's got a little less aiming stability than maybe one would normally desire, but it does perform moderately well at the medium range. And really, if you're looking for a close range kilo build where you're looking to have the potential to use that awesome recoil control for a mid-range engagement, this is a good place to start. The Ranger foregrip both helps your recoil control and your aiming stability, which counters a lot of the aiming stability loss you see from the close quarter stock and the rubberized grip tape. Really what you're looking at here is an overabundance of recoil control beyond what the Kilo normally needs, but all of that excess recoil control combined with the Ranger foregrip's aiming stability actually keeps your medium range accuracy decently good. With some practice, you don't even need to make any adjustments for this. Now, the reason why sleight of hand is something that whoever dreamed up this blueprint went with rather than an extended clip, which normally makes more sense in the Kilo, is because as good as the Kilo is with extended clips, after all, once you hit past 20-ish bullets, you're looking again at almost no vertical recoil. It makes typically more sense to go with a larger clip size, but because this particular Kilo is designed for close range engagements and generally speaking you don't want that slowdown of movement speed for rushing strategies that close range builds typically lend themselves to, the designer opted for sleight of hand over an extended clip. Now, if you want to use an extended clip with the Kilo, that's totally up to you. It's not like it's impossible to play a rush strat with an extended clip, but it's just slightly harder. And that's why the sleight of hand was chosen here rather than, say, a larger clip. So this actually is a decent, this particular blueprint performed better at the mid-range than I was expecting, and decently well to close range. It's definitely a versatility gun, but it's definitely got closer range more in mind. If I had to make any recommendation, I would actually throw out the possibility of swapping the rubberized grip tape for the muzzle brake, which helps bring your leftwards kick under control and really helps you to bring the whole gun better in line without losing anything, really. You lose a little bit of ADS speed, but with the close quarters stock, you can really afford to lose that anyways, and you don't lose aiming stability with the muzzle brake, so your medium range game also improves. So it's just a swap for the rubberized grip tape to muzzle brake is an excellent pickup there. It's an excellent swap for this particular build. Now we're going to talk about the Cerulean, which is a particularly interesting blueprint for beyond just the fact that it has blue tracers. What's more important is that it offers a blue tack laser. Now, the blue tack laser is important because it is much harder to see a dark blue tack laser, as you can see on screen, than it is to see the bright green one that is typical of tack lasers. So when you're sitting down and you're looking at tack lasers and you happen to own this blueprint, pick the tack laser from the Cerulean. It allows you all of the advantages of the tax laser. I've been doing too much tax homework. Allows you all of the advantages of the tack laser without the disadvantage of being very visible. It is still visible. I'm not going to say, oh, it's practically invisible. No, it's not. If an opponent is paying attention or moving slow enough, they'll see it. But anyone running at actual top speed, sprinting speed, isn't going to see this unless they're really sharp-eyed. beyond that, this particular blueprint is fairly interesting in that it's clearly designed for the mid-range, but the Canted Hybrid really allows you to fight decently well at the close range. Still not what I would call an ideal switch kilo build, which is allowing you to switch between close and medium range. Like I said, it is primarily designed for that medium range engagement. It performs really well in Warzone for reference. You've got that aiming stability out of the Commander foregrip in the Sniper Pro, recoil stabilization. You actually have more aiming stability with this build than probably a Canted Hybrid optic needs, I'm going to be really honest. And dropping the Sniper Pro stock in favor of, I would say, actually in favor of either the rubberized grip tape or the compensator, or even a silencer would be a better pick for the Cerulean than the Sniper Pro stock. The 60 round mags, again, in terms of magazine size, this is a little bit more of a preference. If you really like playing close range, but you want the blue tracers, and you like the Canted Hybrid, then I would recommend pulling the 60 round mags off, but if you prefer those mid-range engagements, that's fine. I personally play with this better than I think a lot of other equivalent kilo players do, because I play slower and I play from a farther distance, so this setup is better for me, and I generally only use the canted closer range sight in an emergency when I'm really under pressure and I'm expecting an opponent to come around up into my face pretty quick. I don't generally use it here. I would have personally just been happy with the Scout Combat Optic, but I do appreciate occasionally the Canted Hybrid, at least for this particular setup. But yes, if you were going to take the Cerulean and try to improve it, I would swap out the stock for a compensator or a silencer, or possibly rubberized grip tape if you really don't want to drop your ADS speed. Now we have the Dying Light, which is an entirely different animal. It's weird, where it feasibly could play at the close range with the Flip Hybrid, but absolutely nothing it has really lends itself to a close range fight, so it's really more of, we're pretending that the 4x Flip Hybrid actually does 4 times. Now, if the 4x Flip Hybrid was an actual 4 times scope when it was being used for the scoped version, I'm going to use that quote loosely, then yes, this would make a lot of sense, but it's 3.25, and the close range with this particular setup, you've got the extended barrel, you have aiming stability out the wazoo. You would actually be better off swapping the Flip Hybrid for a straight sniper scope, and it would make more sense with this build, and even then I would still recommend the variable zoom, because the gun does perform decently well at the mid-range. It's really the long range that everything but the scope is designed for, so if you want to pick up the Dying Light and you really want to play with this particular kilo blueprint, or at least build something off of this blueprint, your best option here is to swap out the Flip Hybrid for the variable zoom scope, and you will find yourself in a much better position and playing much better as long as you can maintain that distance. Now, if you were going to be needing, say, something closer range, I would recommend a really good pistol, and you may already use one. I personally tend to use launchers as my secondary, so I would typically, if I was going to play this particular blueprint, make that swap to the variable zoom scope, slap on my trusty 1911, and I would just run with that with this particular kilo. It's really designed for a longer range than the scope on it really can do, but whoever designed it didn't obviously read the description or forgot. It doesn't really make a big difference, just keep that in mind if you want to be building something off of this. I put it here because it does have the mid to short range scope, so by definition it is designed for that particular kind of situation, but all of the other attachments really say mid to long range at minimum. So I just wanted to have this little tangent go off here where it technically belongs. It also allows me to keep track of it better in terms of kilo blueprints that I've tested. The Ghostly Premonitions is an interesting one because it's actually well designed for the medium range. I'm going to be really honest. It has everything right here. It's got one level of aiming stability, it's got a recoil control in the SOCOM barrel, it's got a little bit of range out of that too, which for the kilo is okay. The kilo is one of those guns that can use some range, but it's not necessary for it to operate at full efficiency. It's got the muzzle brake. The only thing really that confuses me about the build is the 1 megawatt laser, which allows you to fight close range, hip firing, sure, which I can appreciate the diversity out of that, but personally, if I were to take this and make it into a serious gun, I would swap that 1 megawatt laser for a tac laser, again, preferably the cerulean one, because that second level of aiming stability, the ADS speed to compensate for the extended barrel and the scope, the tac laser will really put this at an excellent, high-quality, mid-range kilo build. You lose your ability to effectively fight hip-fire at close range, but if you're using the kilo properly, which is generally keeping most of your opponents mid-range, then that's really not as much of a problem. That would be my recommendation here. The actual baseline blueprint, like a lot of these blueprints, if you've been paying attention for the medium range, a lot of these blueprints maybe could do with a single attachment swap to something else to really be more effective at the chosen role that they're theoretically designed for. But this one happens to be one of my favorites because I personally feel the Kilo is best at the mid-range where you can utilize that recoil control against guns that you typically wouldn't beat in a normal firefight, but once you get to that mid-range and you really bring that awesome recoil control to bear, they really don't often stand a chance. There are a couple of exceptions. If an opponent has built an assault rifle for a specifically mid-range build, or something a little longer, for example the M4A1 using SOCOM rounds, that's a conversation I intend to have at a later date with a different video, but something very specifically designed for mid-range combat might beat you out with a Kilo, but in most situations your superior recoil control to mid-range is just going to win, and this gun really does a good job of pulling that off, especially if you swap the 1 megawatt laser for the tac laser. The next particular one we are looking at here is the Sandbar. Now this is interesting because rather than utilizing the suppressed barrel that the Kilo has as an available option, it's got an actual monolithic suppressor. Now I have my own issues with this build. First off, the integral hybrid I'm not fond of as a scope. That's a personal thing. I'm not really going to say don't ever use the integral hybrid. That's an entirely comfort thing. But this particular build doesn't really have a whole lot in the way of effective purpose here. You've got the close quarters stock and the tac laser for that ADS speed. You've got a little bit of aiming stability and recoil control out of, again, the tac laser, the operator foregrip for that recoil control. Tac laser doesn't have recoil control. I was going to combine the two, but that doesn't really work. The monolithic suppressor for range and very small enhancements recoil control, and I don't know why they would slap this on here. It honestly doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Granted, I'm going to be really honest here. I played with this really well, despite my reservations about how it's built, and I cannot actually tell you effectively. Well, I can tell you why to some extent. The monolithic suppressor provides just that right amount of recoil stability, where, because it's the monolithic suppressor and suppressors naturally increase recoil control and recoil stability slightly, it really works well with this particular setup, because that's just that right amount of recoil stabilization where it almost acts like a muzzle brake. Not quite, it's a little wild sometimes, but it's closer than just not having anything there at all. The range I don't really need out of the suppressor though. This particular build doesn't need it. I would personally shrink that down to the lightweight suppressor or the tac suppressor, one or the other. Either one works better for this build than the monolithic, from my personal opinion at least. Again, the scope is not my favorite scope, but that's a personal thing. It's a very odd blueprint to play, and if the other blueprints for some reason don't work, I would recommend trying this, as nonsensical as it sounds and or looks. It works better than you would think just looking at it, which is very odd. But give it a try in its base form. It's surprisingly effective. So I'm going to be talking about the field guide and the Regal Retribution in basically the same blueprint, because they are identical in all ways except one. The Regal Retribution swaps the Sniper Pro stock of the field guide for the Ranger 4 grip, making the Regal Retribution slightly better and slightly better able to handle the no stock modification which allows it to actually serve okay in small map modes. Really, it's supposed to be intended for use in Ground War and to some extent Warzone. The problem with both of these blueprints and these general designs is that they're very passive, unfortunately, because of how slow they are. It's pretty hard to push an offense with either of these builds, even when you put on no stock for better ADS and movement speed, simply because your aiming stability isn't going to be high enough to really fight the mid-range, and you really can't close it as well, so the integral hybrid is kind of a waste because you don't really often find yourself using that mid-range unless you're either desperate or you're willing to put an entire full drum down lane just so you can actually potentially kill a couple of people. It's just not a particularly efficient way of building. If you are going to use the 100 round drums, which is a unique facet of the Kilo, and I do highly recommend at least trying it. It's unusually effective in Warzone and Ground War. Don't extend the barrel on it. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense initially, but the Kilo is one of those guns that can really take or leave range. It doesn't really make a huge difference. Its recoil control is such that even if you're doing less damage at longer ranges, you can maintain your firing control to such a good extent that you can do a reasonably good job of killing people at longer ranges, even if they feasibly would be able to kill you at longer ranges, with the possible exception of the more powerful sniper rifles like the HDR and the Axe-50, which generally are just going to destroy you before you can even sneeze. Regardless, that would really be my recommendation here. Unfortunately, both of these blueprints make the fatal error of extending the barrel of the Kilo, which makes it even slower to the point where not even cutting the stock off of either of these blueprints makes it truly functional in a close map mode. And so they're pretty niche in general. Now, unlike the last video, which only had the one blueprint that I was really talking about there, and I adjusted that for a longer range, I adjusted that to be more in line with the kind of long-range Kilo I use. I'm not going to do that here. We had enough blueprints where this video was of a decent enough size, and furthermore, I do want something to talk about for the conclusion of this series, where I'll be talking about the numbers behind the Kilo, and also different variations of the Kilo for specific map types. And the Kilo that I usually use personally at the mid-range is often what I use for a lot of those anyways, with some very mild adjustments, but I'll be covering that in the concluding video of this series. For the next episode, I'm going to be doing a video on the close-range Kilo blueprints and talking about the Kilo from a specifically close-range perspective. With that being said, thank you very much for watching and or listening, and have a great 24 hours.